Research ethics. What is it and why bother? So, research ethics, as we know it today, started after World War II, when people gathered in Nuremberg and decided that what happened during this war must never happen ever again. So they sat down and they created a list of guidelines. And those guidelines follow us and guide us today, even today, when we do a research design and we do any type of research. We have more modern versions. We have the Declaration of Human Rights and the Helsinki Accord, and probably even newer than that, but the basic principles are the same. Those principles are that we should have voluntary consent. No, we should not force anyone to participate in our studies. We should avoid unnecessary suffering, so we shouldn't just harm people for the sake of it. We should have a reason. If we have to harm people, there should be a reason for it. We should avoid accidental death or injury. Probably not that big a deal in software engineering, but still, it guides us. We shouldn't let people die. If harm is likely, if we think that this is not going to give us the results we want and people will be harmed psychologically or physically, we need to terminate the study. We should have highly qualified people to conduct our experiments, and results should be for the good of the society and not unattainable by any other means. So if we could find out the same thing doing, for example, a literature study, or if we could do it in some other way that did not involve humans, we should try to do that instead. In software engineering and in computer science, we are often bound by different code of ethics. So IEEE has one code of ethics, discuss more or less the same things, but how are we supposed to function as engineers, as good engineers? We should do responsible decisions. We shouldn't take bribery. We should improve the understanding of technology, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to read these for you. I encourage you to find them on your own and have a look at them. If you go into other computing societies, they will have similar things, like ACM has something like this. There's also a subchapter that discusses particularly software engineering code of ethics. This one might be interesting for you. Again, have a look at it in your own time. Most of these things, most of these code of ethics are variations of respect, persons, beneficence, and justice. And I'm going to talk more about those three key points in this lecture. Many employers have a code of ethics that you need to sign when you're employed by them. Discussing again combinations of variations of this, but the gist of it is the same: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And then, once we have that framework in place, what do we mean when we sign these code of ethics and these rules of conduct and stuff? How do they guide what we do? So I've divided this presentation into basically three different parts: what research should be done, how should research be conducted, and how should research be reported. The research that should be done. First of all, let's point out that there is no such thing as perfectly ethical research, and there is no such thing as perfectly harmless research. We're always harming someone, somehow, by the research that we do. For example, if we pay more attention to what one developer does and not what his colleagues does, well, the first developer will feel empowered. We are paying attention to him and his work, whereas the other persons are not going to get that satisfaction, and they're going to feel that neglected. That's the easy bit. The next bit, if you actually succeed in your research, if you manage to impose some change, you are actually changing the way people are working. You are changing the power structures between people. So going from a situation where everyone basically knows what they're supposed to do, whom to look out for, whom to report to, and then you come with your research and you change that. So you're going to impose a certain amount of psychological harm just by doing that until they've settled into the new way of working. You are invading their privacy in order to get useful information. Sorry. You are asking them questions about what they do, why they do it, how they do it, and that's not always easy for them to tell. Maybe they have deep personal reasons for doing things in the way they do it. So you're invading their privacy. You're taking up their time. So if you spend a couple of hours in an interview with someone, that person has to catch up afterwards. He doesn't get less work to do because he's been talking to you. Rather the opposite. He's got more to do afterwards. So he may have to work overtime, or he will be at least stressed because he has to catch up with the work that he should have done instead of talking to you. You, as a researcher, will go on and be famous. You will build your career based on what you talk to your developers, for example, about. They will remain subject number 23 in your studies. Very anonymous. They will not see any clear benefit from participating. So you're stepping on them, in a sense. You're using them to climb in your career. And of course, it's a minor ethical dilemma, but it still is an ethical dilemma. To what extent should you climb on other people in order to build your own career? Philosophers have been defining a large set of different ethical models. Anything from the first one, value-free model, where research in itself doesn't harm or do any good, it's what the use we put it to. So any research is neutral, and the use we find for it can be good and can be harmful. And then we have a lot of different other models where we do social problems. We try to solve different social problems, making the world slightly better. The Marxist model, where we help those that do not have against those that do have. Vulnerable populations model, where the idea is that we try to empower those social groups or other groups that lack power. Government porn model, we only do research that help government decision makers, to make better decisions. Corporate shill, we help those companies that are prepared to pay for us. And then we can merge these and mix these and mingle into some sort of self-imposed morality model, where, for example, we only do research on open source software and refuse to use any tools that aren't open source, for example. I've seen some researchers like that. They miss a certain number of opportunities by doing so. But I think the bottom line with this slide is that none of these models will actually work in practice. You will have to mix and mingle between them to find something that actually makes sense to you. A realistic example of which research you should do is that you have a contact with a company, you're talking with them, you're perhaps just have a friend who's working there and you're out having coffee with them. But together you discuss a research idea, you define a research proposal. This might look like consultancy work, process improvement, process monitoring, software evaluations, whatever. And you discuss this with the company to a point where you see that you can get some research out of it, and the company sees that they get something out of it. So this will be a mix between consultancy work and actual research, but you will have to sell it into the company so that they get satisfied with what they get out. They may be happy with research, but if they're not used to working together with academia, they will not really see the value of having a research report written about them. Whereas other companies are happy to say that, yeah, we're happy that you do research on this, we're happy that we are at the forefront of state of knowledge. Once you've defined your research proposal, you apply for funding. In Sweden, that typically means that you go to a government funding agency and write up your proposal and send it to this government funding agency. There we have a couple in Sweden, and if you then get the funding, that's not very easy to get in Sweden today, but nevertheless, you conduct the research together with the company. So which research should you do then? Well, the long and the short of this way of working is that if you can get the company to collaborate with you on a particular issue, and if you can get the government funding agency to pay you to do it, well, that's the research you should do. Of course, you can steer this a bit. You have your own interests. So when you talk with the company, if you like testing, for example, software testing, and you're talking to a company, you're of course going to look closer into software testing. You're not going to do research about requirements engineering because that's not your field of expertise. But exactly what to do within software testing is something you decide together with the company. This does not mean that you should only prove what the company wants proven, but the area and the problem is often defined together with the companies like this today. But the balances that you have to do is, are you actually doing research or consultancy? Because there will be a certain amount of just regular grunt work in order to come to a point when your research ideas make sense to investigate. And when you do your study, how much should you actually do what the company wants you to do? How much should your results steer towards what the company wants you to steer? I would argue that you shouldn't, but defining the problem together and investigating it together should be enough. You should not have to mock up any results, because then you are in really deep water when it comes to research ethics. So, now we have our research proposal. We know what research we should do. And next question is, how should we conduct it? And I come back then to the three pillars: respect for persons, beneficience, and justice. So, we should respect the persons that are involved, make sure that they know what they're getting into, and that they have a fair chance of actually getting out of it with their health intact. Beneficience, we should minimize harm and maximize the benefits. We should try to get as much good results as possible, whatever that means, out of the study, and trying to avoid harming people and companies as much as possible. And justice, so everyone should benefit equally from your study, and I'll come back to this one a bit further. And burdens in terms of that, well, everyone should have to work equally hard in your study to conduct it. Encourage participation is important. So if we are doing, for example, an interview study, we're doing a case study, we're doing a survey, and we want people to participate in this, and then some people would argue this actually is from criminal justice, so it might not be fully applicable to software engineering, but they would say that there are only three ways to encourage participation. We can promise anonymity, we can promise confidentiality, and we can have informed consent. This excludes our ability to, for example, pay for participation. We're not, according to this, we're not allowed to pay our subjects to participate in a study. Why would this be wrong in software engineering? Well, I think it probably isn't, but there are a lot of philosophical debate about that research should be a free gift. So when these individuals, when these subjects participate in your study, they are freely giving of their knowledge and their expertise for you to write that up, sum that up, and then freely give it on to the research community. And then the research community should then freely carry that onwards to those other companies where your research might be applicable. Now, in criminal justice, it makes even more sense because let's say you're doing an interview study on convicts, and then you're paying them. That would mean that you're in some sense are rewarding them for having committed a crime. They commit a crime, they go to prison, and then you pay them to participate in an interview study. There is very obviously ethically and morally wrong to do so. In software engineering, well, people haven't committed crimes to get a job in software engineering, so it wouldn't be that bad. What you would normally see in studies, especially if you're trying to get broad support for, let's say you're doing a usability study and you're picking people off the street to participate in this usability study, well, you would offer them, for example, movie tickets or something like that, a reimbursement of their costs, perhaps buy them lunch or something, as a token of your appreciation, and that is okay. Paying the salary of highly skilled software developers is, I guess it is ethically and morally okay to do so, based on my previous discussion, but I also doubt that you will actually find any funding agencies willing to pay for that. So you won't get funding to pay for an interview study like that. So it's probably out of the question for that reason. Now, anonymity means full anonymity, and there is only one way to interpret this. So if you promise anonymity, you keep that promise. You will, for example, try to avoid keeping the names and identifications of people in the same place as your research results. You will perhaps code that. So if you have research results, you will code that with subject number 23, and then at a separate place you will have subject number 23 is Mr. Such and Such working at this and that company. And the moment you no longer need that, so once you're done with your study, you don't have to contact Mr. Such and Such again. You destroy that piece of information. You just keep subject number 23, because that is then should then be sufficient for you to analyze the results further. If they tell you something, if your subjects tell you something that might be newsworthy, you still have promised them anonymity, so you will not go to the media, no matter what they tell you. You will tell them where you're going to publish the results so that they can check on you afterwards and see that you did not actually identify them in any way. If a court should order you to hand over all your material, for example, if there is some debate about what people have told you and they want full access to your research material, you should destroy your documents. There was a case in Sweden where a guy was following people with ADD, attention deficit disorder, over a long period of time, like 20-30 years, from when people were kids and first diagnosed up until when they had left universities and had jobs. And the entire material, he published a lot out of it, and there was a debate about some other researchers questioned that he actually had done this study properly, or whether he had invented the results. So they wanted access to his lab notes, his journals from this entire period, and he could not do that, because if you follow someone from when they're kids and then they move to this and that school, they go to that and specialization during high school, and then they move on to this and that university, and then they have jobs in this and that sector. If you have this much information, at least in Sweden, you can more or less single out, well, it's this particular guy, or girl for that matter. So he couldn't hand out his research journals, simply because it was impossible to maintain anonymity. Eventually a court ordered him to hand over the material anyway, at which point two of his PhD students broke into his office and destroyed the notes. Because they had promised anonymity, and the only way to keep that promise was to destroy those notes. And that is how hard you should maintain your anonymity promises. Now, in software engineering, we rarely have to go to these extents. This is more common if you do social research or medical research. What we have confidentiality instead, which is a softer form. Here, it's okay for you to keep your the names of people together with the data. There's no need to separate it into two documents. It might be good practice still to do so, just for the habit of it, so you do not inadvertently reveal the identity of the people that you have been talking to. But there is no real need to do it. But what you do is that you guarantee that no one will be individually identifiable in any way by you, and that when you report upon your research in your publications, tables and figures and everything will discuss the findings in the aggregate. This isn't a hard promise to make, because no one is really interested in the individual answers anyway. They want to see what is the overall trend, what is the aggregate result. And when you're talking, when you're revealing information from a company, you will often have to sign non-disclosure agreements. We agree more or less to this effect, that we will not reveal anything that will be able, so that anyone outside the company, their competitors, will be able to identify exactly how they work and exactly who you talk to and exactly how good they are. So you will have to, in some cases, blur a bit of results or report them in a different way to avoid these things. Now, let's say you've done your interview study with people who have just been arrested. Let's go back to the criminal justice case. And during the interviews, everyone confesses to the crime. Would you then be able to say in your report that, well, of all the people I interviewed, well, everyone confessed? You haven't individually identified anyone. You haven't pointed the finger at anyone in your data set. You've reported your findings in the aggregate, so that should be okay, right? Problem is that you're talking to particular people, and the prison guards know who you've been talking to. So if you say that everyone confessed, the prison guards will know that, well, this person and that person have confessed, because those are the guys that these researchers talk to. So there you would probably have to find a different way of doing the research. So you cannot individually identify people. Perhaps you will have to interview more people, so that you get a selection where you can say that not everyone confessed. Maybe that's what you will say in the report as well. You will say that, well, there were confessions, and then discuss it in that sense. So vaguely saying that people did confess, some people confessed, there were confessions, which is vaguer. You're not exactly lying, you're telling a slightly white lie in order to keep your confidentiality of your subjects. I have an example at the end of this presentation where I try to translate this into what would be a relevant case for software engineering, so I'm coming back to this one later. Informed consent. This is something that we should practice better than with what we do. What it means is that we should tell them everything they want to know about our research and be honest with them about it, saying that this is what we are going to do, this is why we're going to do it. And then we should allow people to form their own opinion about whether they would like to participate or not. If your teacher tells you that, well, I'm doing this experiment and you're participating, would that be informed consent? Do you have your own choice of whether you want to participate or not? Especially if the teacher then adds that, well, if you don't participate, I won't be able to give you a grade in this course. Now you have no choice, right? You want a grade in the course, you want a good grade in the course, so of course you're going to participate. Let's back down a bit and say that, well, I'm doing this experiment, I would like you to participate. Now you're thinking that, well, if I don't participate, that will reflect badly on me, so I will get a worse grade. So I have to participate in order to improve my chances of getting a good grade. Now, the responsible way for your teacher to do this is to say that I have this experiment. I have this experiment. It is about, requirements prioritization. And I'm trying out new methodologies of doing requirements prioritization. And it's important for you in this particular course, let's say it's a course on research methodology, to participate in an experiment. I think that is a useful experience for you to figure out how it is to actually participate in the experiment. And then we'll talk about how it is to actually construct the experiment. So you will see both sides. So it's important for you for that reason. Therefore, I am making this exercise mandatory. So it's mandatory for you to participate in the experiment. But whatever you do in the experiment will not reflect upon your grade in any way. And if you do not want to participate in my study, I have a checkbox for that in the material I'm giving you, so you can opt out from that bit. You can say that I'm participating in the study, I'm participating in the experiment for the sake of this class, but I do not want to participate in your study. So now you have a choice. You have a true choice. The teacher has promised you that it will not reflect upon your grade. He has said that it is mandatory, so you have no choice in that matter. But you also know that you don't have to do well or behave in a particular way during the experiment, because you will still get your grade based on your other performance in the course. And if you don't like the research proposal, you can opt out of it. You can say, well, I want no part of this. Same thing applies, let's say in a company you have a company sponsor. That's the typical case. You have one person, one manager with whom you're discussing your research and who is championing your research inside the company. And what you want to do an interview study, and then this company champion will tell you that, well, you can talk to these guys, and he'll give you a list of people to talk to. That's okay. But then you have a friendly manager who will also say that I'll send them an email and tell them that they have to participate. And now you're back to this same problem again. Can they say to their boss that, no, I don't want to participate, I don't have time, I've got a dentist appointment, or whatever? Of course not. They're going to do what their boss tells them to do. So they no longer have their choice of doing as they see fit. So if your company sponsor tells you that, well, I will send out an email, well, make sure that you're the one writing that email, and that email should be more about informing them about the study, about the benefits of the study, about the ideas behind the study, and kindly asking them to participate. And then when you actually contact them, that's when you ask them, actually. You don't ask them in the mail that the manager sends out. You ask them in your individual mails. And whether they participate or not is not something that your company sponsor should eventually know of. A very minimum consent form is to say that I have been informed and understand the personal and professional risks involved by participating in this study. I agree to assume those risks, and my participation is purely voluntary, without any promise of special rewards as a result of my participation. There are a few key words here. I have been informed and I understand. Well, let's see. Have I been informed? Well, yes, he did tell me a lot of stuff before I had to sign this, so yes, okay, I've been informed. Hang on, personal and professional risks. Are there risks involved in participating in the study? They didn't tell me anything about risks. What are those risks? Alright, I agree to assume them once we've discussed them. Participation is purely voluntary. Hang on, I thought I was participating because my boss told me to. Can I opt out? And then I'd better ask that researcher, can I actually choose not to participate? And without any promise of special rewards, I thought this would look good in my next salary negotiation. Won't it? No, let's discuss that, and okay, then I might not participate after all. So there are a lot of keywords here that will trigger a discussion, and that's how you should see this consent form. It is not a piece of paper that you just want a signature on to wash your hands and keep your back clear. It is an opportunity to discuss your research with your subjects before they participate. So a more detailed consent form would include a brief description of the purpose and the procedure of the research, how long it will take, what you're going to do, what they're going to do, what the intention is, any risks, discomforts, inconveniences that you know of that they might experience while participating, guarantee anonymity or confidentiality, explain what you mean by this, identification and sponsorship of the research. So if you're doing your research sponsored by, let's say, a large multinational company and with a less than clean reputation, then people might not want to participate because they're going to think that you're just running their errands, right? Statement that participation is voluntary, again, so that they have been informed that they can opt out if they like to. If they want to discontinue participation at any point, even after you've started the experiment, they should know that they can do so without any penalty. If there is any other way they can come to the same result, you should inform that you know of. They should be informed about that. And if there's any benefits to the class of subjects, you can inform them about this. And you should offer to provide a free copy of the summary of the findings, so that they see, I participated in the study, I contributed with my knowledge, my expertise, and my time, and that's what this researcher did with it. This is the report, these are the results of it. So they can learn something, hopefully, based on their participation. It is not always possible to tell them exactly what they're doing or what you're doing in your study. So again, sometimes you may need to be slightly less than truthful, but the idea is still that you should try to be as honest as possible. And if you do have to hide certain facts, then try to tell them as much as you can still. So for example, I was doing a study once on requirements prioritization, and I had this idea that if you get requirements in a certain order, so let's say you get your requirements already prioritized, you will prioritize them in one way. And if you get them in a random order, you will perhaps get different results on your prioritization. Or if you get them in reverse order, so that the most important requirements are listed first, and the least important requirements are listed first, and the most important are listed last. Will you then prioritize them in a different way? So how does the order of requirements affect the priorities you would assign to them? Now, if I were to tell my subjects that beforehand, they would start looking at the requirements and start guessing, which group am I? Did I get the ones that were already prioritized, or did I get the ones that were in reverse priority, or did I get a random? So I could not tell them that beforehand. So what I told them was that I was testing some aspects of a new prioritization method. So we chose the prioritization method to be new, which we would have done anyway, and we emphasized that that was what we were testing, and some aspects was sufficient for them to participate in the study. And then afterwards, the day after, I had a debriefing with them, and I told them that, well, these some aspects was the order of the prioritization. So there are situations when you cannot tell them the full truth beforehand, but you can tell them as much as possible so that they know what's going to happen to them. I could tell them everything about the procedure, expected duration, risks, discomfort, and all of that I could. The only thing I could not tell them about was the purpose. And then when you collect your data, you should get permissions from the people. So let's say you want to measure productivity, and you want to measure that on the amount of source code that people commit in the configuration management system. Well, you should have their permission to do so first. You shouldn't just measure things and then write things up. If you measure things from a particular person, well, that person should be notified that you are indeed measuring these things. The manager needs to know, of course, as well, so they can approve it. Try to avoid disrupting to as large an extent as possible. If you're doing interview studies, for example, you have no choice. You have to take up their time, but try to pilot your study beforehand, so that you know that once you go in and do the interview study, it is as streamlined as possible and you will get relevant results out of it. You don't go in and ask random questions hoping to find something, because that will disrupt more than the good that you expect to get out of it. Everyone should benefit. That comes back to the Beneficience guideline. So let's say you're testing, I don't know, test-driven development and a unit test framework in, say, Node.js, and you take a group of people, you divide it, split it in half, and say that half of them, we call them Group A, will get training on a unit testing framework for Node.js, and the other group, Group B, won't get that training. So, and then you give them a few tasks to do, a few systems to develop, where they get Group A gets to use Node.js and unit testing, and Group B gets to use Node.js without unit testing, and then you measure the quality of it or something. Now, once you're done with the study, if you decide, first of all, for a research methodology standpoint, you would like to swap over anyway, but let's assume that you don't have time to do that. There's no possible way of doing this. So this is your study design. Group A does it with unit testing, Group B does it without unit testing. Once you're done, these people have to go back to their previous jobs. They have to work side by side. Group A knows unit testing. They write quality, much more high quality code now, which will be visible in the next salary revision and in their careers, that, well, I know how to do unit testing properly in Node.js. Whereas Group B, they won't know this, so they won't get the salary raises. They won't get these high and fancy jobs that require that you know how to do unit testing. So once you're done with your first study, and even if you're finished from a research standpoint, you should make sure that you should swap over. You should train Group B on how to do unit testing in Node.js, and then you should run a second set of systems to develop where they get to practice it, so that once you're finished, everyone in your study have had equal opportunity to learn how to do unit testing in Node.js. Right, next item then. How should we actually report the research? Once we've done it, so we've decided this is the research we should do, this is how we do it, and now when it's time to report it. The first principle is that you should try to spread your results as widely as possible. That's your way of paying people back for participating. They volunteered information, time, etc., etc. And it's now your job to make sure that that sacrifice on their behalf reach as many people as possible in as good a way as possible. And when you write your report, there are a few principles that should govern your report. First of all, you should be honest and truthful. You should give credit for work performed, and it should be replicatable. Let's see if I have a slide on this. Yes, lovely. So, honest and truthfully, we should not make up data or lie about the procedures. We should tell this is exactly how we did it and this is why we did it in that way. Your field records, your journals and your logs are your proof of that you've actually done it like this. That's a good idea if you're doing any type of long-term study, or actually even a short-term study, is to keep a journal. So at the end, if you're doing interviews, for example, at the end of each day, you write a note in your journal. Had an interview with such and such. Was hard to get him to talk, but we managed in the end to get an interesting conversation out of it. Question: how does this relate to what Mr. Whatever told me 2 weeks back? So your ideas are there. Venues that you need to pursue further. And your log that you actually did talk to people, your impressions after that meeting, and then you can just tag on the transcript of the interview to that particular day. And then if you need to, you can go back and you can see when did you have this conversation. That might help you remember things at a later stage. Falsification is then that we manipulate data so that we get the desired outcome. So, for example, we can manipulate the scales on graphs. We can be more frivolous when we decide what is an outlier. So we would normally have your data set, you have your results, and most of them let's say follow a particular curve, and then you have some data sets that do not follow that curve, and you would be able to discard them as saying that, well, they're outliers because they didn't complete the study, they didn't understand it, or they have very, very, very different opinions, and that's because they have a completely different background, etc., etc. So it's common practice that you would be able to clean your data set to a certain extent. But if you clean it too much, you will see that sometimes that people clean their data set too much just because they want to reach a particular conclusion, and then it's no longer pucka to do. So what the way to do it is that when you want to remove a particular data point from your data set, you're open about it. You say that this data point, this particular data point, I want to remove that because it does not, that person did not understand what we were talking about. That person had a very different background. We should have spotted it beforehand. We didn't. That's actually an interesting idea for future research, to investigate what is it in their background that actually causes this person to have that different an opinion. But you're open about it in your report, in your article, and you talk about why do you remove people, or data points, sorry, so that people can assess this and say that, yeah, that makes sense, you removed that data point for a reason, I can see that you needed to remove it in order to make a cleaner analysis of it. Plagiarism then, the last point, is when you're taking credit for someone else's work. Now, we have, in software engineering, we have a tradition going back now 70, 80 odd years actually, of software engineering research, software engineering and computer science. And if you include mathematics, it's of course several hundred years. You are not reinventing the wheel. You are, remember what Isaac Newton said, if I've seen further than others, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. Now, the correct way to work with research is to acknowledge that you are standing on the shoulders of those giants. You cite them. If you include their work, if you include their ideas, if you include their results, which you shouldn't, but sure, then you cite these giants. You don't tread on their ears when you're standing on their shoulders. If someone has done something, they need due credit, and the way to do it is that if you are if you relate their ideas, if you make a précis out of what they write in a paper and you put that in as a summary in your paper, then you put a citation to the original source. This strengthens your paper because it means that your paper and your ideas and your results are not alone. They are actually building upon others. So others have found similar things, so your results are more true than they would otherwise be. So it's good for the article as well to do it. So I have a few examples. These would actually make be more sense to discuss in a classroom, but since we don't have that opportunity, I'll just go through them briefly. I encourage you to discuss it within the class with others and find similar examples. Take these examples and stretch them. How far can I go before it becomes ethically indefensible? I've done it as a few research ideas. So the first one is a research question. You have, what is the effect of team size on productivity? I've borrowed this from Tom DeMarco's book, The Deadline. And the way you design the study is that you have 3 different software development teams, and they develop the same software under a tight deadlines. We have the A team, which has more developers than is strictly needed for the project. We have the B team, which have just the right amount of developers for the project. And the C team has too few people, half the amount of people that you think is required to complete the project within the deadline. Now, there are a couple of different issues here. First of all, naming. We have A, B, and C team. Of course, the A team are going to feel that, yeah, we're the good guys, we're the first, we're the A team. And the C team will think that, yeah, we're the third-rate rejects. You can just as easily rename them to the blue, yellow, and green team and get the same effect. That's an easy way of removing some of the ethical, the stress and the power struggles that you would otherwise you might get. Stress levels from the tight deadline. So all of them are going to feel that, ooh, this was a really tight deadline. We need to apply ourselves in order to actually meet this deadline. In the 2 small C team, they're going to really feel that, oh, we'll have to work overtime, we'll have to do all-nighters, and we still won't make it. So some of them might even start developing ulcers because the deadline is so tight and there are so few of them. In the A team, you would think that that's great. I mean, we have more people than we need, but the deadline is still tight, and you will have a hard time inside that project explaining what everyone should do, and everyone feels the pressure of the tight deadline. Everyone feels that this is a valuable product. Everyone feels that they have to contribute, but when they are not getting assigned work to do, well, they'll be stressed about that. All of them will probably be discontent with the project managers. This is a really badly planned project. We have too many people, we have too few people, the deadline is too tight, we won't be able to make it, and they will start, they might say things they were going to regret. They're going to be angry with the project managers inside the projects, and the project managers are going to feel the resentment of the rest of the teams. So a relatively harmless research question, a fairly straightforward research design, will create a lot of ethical stress and tensions. Of course, you can't. Here is also one other case where you cannot really tell the different teams, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it, because then they are going to, the C team, for example, is going to figure out that, yeah, we have too few people, so it's okay if we fail, so we're not going to bother about it. We're not going to apply ourselves. So your results will be skewed if you actually tell them the truth. So at the very least, if I were to do a study like this, I would have have to sit down and discuss it carefully with myself, with everyone else involved that I can talk about it with, and a few people from the outside, and see, can we actually do this? How much harm are we going to inflict upon these people if we do the study in this way? Is there any other way we can do it? And try to get an answer to the same research question. So this was an attempt to write up something like Zimbardo's prison experiment. I encourage you to go into Zimbardo's prison experiment. The URL is on the slide. And have a look at it. So what he did was that he took students and he locked them up. Some of the students locked them up in a mock prison, and some of them he appointed to be guards of the others. There's been a couple of movies made out of this as well. And fairly quickly what happened was that the guards started to become quite sadistic, subjecting the prisoners to all sorts of rather torturous treatments, and the prisoners started to identify themselves as being prisoners. And things essentially got out of hand. Now, after a week or so, even Zimbardo himself, he was a professor in psychology, even he got sucked into this. He was the prison warden, and at the end of the week he identified more with being a prison warden than being a psychologist. And it took someone from the outside to hear what they were doing, and then with shock ask, "My God, Zimbardo, what are you doing?" For him to realize what was going on, and then he terminated the experiment. So this experiment was never completed. It was terminated after a week or so, which was good. This was according to the Nuremberg Code, remember, termination if harm is likely. But it's also relatively easy to find similar setups in other areas. I mean, prisons and prison guards, that's obvious, yes. If we go into software engineering, let's say you have testing, and that's the idea with I had with the top 3 bullets on this slide. Let's say we have, rather than each development team does their own testing, we have an external testing team with management support. So what's going to happen is that, well, the developers are going to feel that, yeah, well, no one believes in us. The managers are more interested in those high-fangled testers. And the testers are going to feel that, yeah, right, we've got the management support. We're the guys here. I've seen actually cases in companies where they do this as a matter of principle. You have the testing team is separate, and when you commit your code at the end of the day, you go home, and if your code breaks the nightly build, the testers will show up in the middle of the night dressed in black suits, knock on your door, drag you off to work to fix your code so you can recommit it so that they can get their nightly build through. What you're doing with this experiment in particular is that you're creating your unbalancing existing power structures. You're creating a disbalance or an imbalance where there was possibly harmony beforehand. And testers in particular can become quite sadistic as well, especially if you let them do their thing. Alright, research question. What are the causes of low productivity? Study design is that you identify software engineers with low productivity. For example, you measure their commits on their configuration management system in some way. And then you approach them and say, well, I've been measuring your commits in the configuration management system, and I'm looking for people with lower productivity, and I want to find out the underlying causes for this. You're one of the people I found that had low productivity. Would you mind talking to me about the reasons for this? Now, how are they going to say, no, I don't want to participate? And then you'll, and if they say, well, do I have to participate? And you'll answer, no, you don't have to participate. I'll just leave this list of people with low productivity here on the coffee table where your boss might see it. There are better ways of getting the same results out of this. First of all, you will take a random sample of people without knowing their productivity beforehand. And then you will conduct the interview. I'm interviewing people about their productivity. So how would you rate your own productivity? And are there any, how do you reason about productivity? Why do you think you have the productivity you have? So you will get people with high productivity, you will get people with low productivity from this interview study. And at the end of the study, you might ask them, or at the end of the interview, you might ask them, is it okay if I correlate this with hard data from the configuration management system, just so I can see if people's self-assessment actually meets the actual results that they produce. And then you might get the permission. This goes back to, I think I have this on one of the slides, that you should ask permissions before you collect data. Your company sponsor will probably have a loose idea of whom you've been talking to. So in the first example, where you only contact people with low productivity, your company sponsor will know just by that fact. Even if you don't leave that list on the desk, on the coffee table, your company sponsor is going to know whom had low productivity just by following you and seeing whom you're talking to. In the other study design, where you do a random selection, there's no way of figuring that out. So that's a better study design for confidentiality reasons as well. Let's see, what did I mean with this one? Well, this is an example. I discussed this example in a previous slide. How do you make sure that when you're done, everyone is equally trained? And then we have reporting of the data. So I've got 3 pictures, and I mean, it's like striking in an open door to talk about Fox News and their treatment of statistics, but it proves my point rather nicely. So in this example, we have a bar chart that talks about how it is now during the Bush era, and then what's going to happen if Obama lets the Bush tax cuts expire. This was a couple of years ago, this slide. And you see there's a huge difference between how it is now and how it's going to be in January 2013, right? Until you look at the y-axis, which starts at 34 and ends at 42. So the difference between now and January 1st is what, 4.5%. But by starting the y-axis like they do, they can emphasize this difference and see how much worse it's going to be. This is a way of being less than truthful with your data. You're trying to obscure the results by choosing your scales and choosing the way you present the data, so that it's no longer obvious what the true story is. Here's another example. This one is fun. Looks at the unemployment rate under President Obama, and the story they want to tell is that it's going up. Right? It's getting worse and worse. He had a good point just after he took over in March there, and now it's just getting worse and worse. But look at the numbers. The numbers are correct. The red graph is actually incorrect. They've been moving the data points by hand. So the last data point is 8.6%, right? And then you go back to the first one. 8.6% is lower than 8.8%, isn't it? And yet it is 3-4 bars higher than the 8.8% during March. You see it? Same thing with the 9%, which is very low. 9% there, which should be much higher if you look at the other points. They also start the chart at 8% and ended at 10%, so they've skipped a few values on the y-axis, ostensibly to make room for the presentation, for the chart, but probably because it emphasizes even further to their benefit how bad it's going to be. But the biggest problem here is that they've moved the data point up and down. So the red graph, the red line is completely wrong, whereas the yellow numbers are correct. And this is an example of cherry-picking data points. They want to see how the cost of gas has gone up, probably since Bush was president. So they start at last year, and then they show last week and the current price. First of all, last year to last week is roughly 1 year's difference, and between last week and the current is, well, it's just 1 week. So last week and current are more or less in the same time period, right? Whereas last year is quite some time away. Second of all, they've cherry-picked 3 data points. So on the right, you see the true graph that follows over time with all the data points, or a lot more data points at least. And I think it's the green line that you should look at. Last year 3.17, that's quite in the beginning, and yes, that's correct. But then gas prices went up quite considerably, and they're actually going down now. The only difference is that they went slightly up during last week again, but they've been going down from a peak, and this peak is nowhere visible in the chart on the left hand side. And that's again an example of how you can lie with your data. And the bottom line with these 3 graphs that I've been showing from Fox News is, don't do it like this. People will catch on to it. People will discredit your research based on it. If you have a result, that's the result you should report. A negative result is as important as a positive result. It's just a matter of how you continue with it. Okay, that was all I had to say, I think, about research ethics. Remember, if you just remember, let's see what I have in these 3 points: respect for persons, beneficience, and justice, and honesty in reporting, and avoiding plagiarism, then you should be fairly okay in software engineering and computer science. But it's always good when you're doing a research design involving human subjects, and even if you don't actually actively involve your human subjects, take a moment, think about how will this impact the people that I'm actually studying? How will they feel? What kind of structures, power structures, do I change if I manage with this research? And how can I, is that a good change, or is it something that I should try to avoid or alleviate in some way? So if you think about this when you're doing your research designs and your studies, you should be okay. Thank you for listening.